way. So I haven't done one of these for a long time. And at the start of my career, which was like 12 years ago, I used to have more time to do these things. I used to go to universities and do these kind of talks and things. So it's been a long while. And Nikita kind of came up with the idea of doing something like this. And I'd done it before. And I thought, oh, man, that'd be such a cool way to do it, because I don't have to leave the comfort of my home. And I've been working remotely now, and I'm used to that. So yeah. And also the great thing is, again, like, it's pretty rare if I do a talk at university that everyone's from all these amazing parts of the world. So it's super, super cool. And in regards to kind of like what we're talking about, the information's pretty kind of not necessarily for a particular field, and it doesn't really matter where in the world you are. You can use all these tactics. That's kind of the point of it. So yeah, looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. We're looking forward to it too. Thank you so much for being here. I think we're all really excited to hear what you have to say and what we're going to learn from you. So we can just go ahead to start. But just before we do, just to let everyone know, I am recording this, and there will be Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, just keep them in mind. Maybe write them out. But if you post them during, you might miss them. So I might have to repost them at the end when we get to the Q&A bit. I'm going to let Josh introduce himself properly. But yeah, thank you so much, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Josh Parks. I'm a lead compositor at a company called Important Looking Pirates, which is a very cool name. It's a Swedish company, and we have studios in London and in Germany, and then we kind of have freelancers all over the world, really. And we work on kind of like Jurassic World, Predator. I was just working on as a lead compositor, the new Predator Badlands film. Yeah, lots of stuff. And in my career, I've worked for NPC, Double Negative, ILM, on kind of like Transformers, James Bonds, and things like that. So that's kind of my background, basically, in regards to coming to this. But to be honest with you, that kind of isn't that important, to be honest, because everything I talk about today is less about the VFX side, and less about just the compositing technical stuff, and actually about kind of like tricks that I think people in creative industries can kind of use, that I've kind of over the years stolen maybe, or lightly been influenced from other industries, basically. That's what we're going to be talking about today, as I mentioned. So as Nikita said, at the end of this, we're going to have I've got loads of time for Q&A, basically. And I know Nikita said that's incredibly important for you guys, because you've got some really good questions. So this is going to be about 20-25 minutes. And then I will be happily answer whatever questions you've got. And the whole point of me starting to do teaching in the first place is actually because I felt there's quite a big divide between schools and education side of things and the industry side. And I've worked over the years to kind of help close that a little bit. But if you're wondering about how interviews are, salaries, contracts, anything like that, any of these weird questions that you feel like you can't ask people because it's not professional and things like this, then please feel free to answer at the end in the Q&A, basically, and we'll go from there. So the first thing I want to be talking about that you guys can use in terms of a tactic that I found that the best people use in these creative industries is a thing called modeling, basically. And what I mean by modeling isn't like the VFX side of modeling, where we're making a 3D model. It's actually kind of looking at the people that are doing very well in your particular field and kind of working out what they're doing right into actionable points. It's very easy to look at someone and say, wow, they're doing incredible, and then just kind of being inspired. And that is definitely one thing, but you want to learn from their from what they're doing right, basically, and kind of make a note of that. So one example I'm going to use is actually someone that I used to teach at university, and he's called Jack Pond, and he's a compositor in the industry. And what Jack did compared to everyone else, so he got a job straight out of university, basically, and he went straight in actually as a runner. So he was getting coffees and hard drives around Soho and central London, basically. And that's still a thing, even though everyone works remote. And what he did is he worked his way up into a compositor very, very quickly compared to everyone else in my experience. So generally it takes about 4 to 5 years to become a compositor. He did it in about a year, which is crazy. And how he did that is, what he would do is he would, in the evenings, just after his work, basically, for about 30 minutes to an hour, he'd sit down on a free machine when everyone was kind of roughly going home and there was the odd machine around, and he'd sit there and kind of do some work, basically, like his own work, if that makes sense, for his own projects. Now, the advantage of that is everyone else walking past can see what that person's doing, right? Like, it's very, very apparent what they're doing, and then maybe people come over and they can ask questions and this kind of thing and see what he was doing. And he was actually working on a green screen piece. So he was doing some we call it kings, where you're cutting someone out from a green screen, and was working all this stuff, and someone spotted him doing it and went, wow, like, you're actually pretty good at doing that. We've got a project next week that needs that skill. Would it be possible for you to not do your running anymore and start helping us actually do compositing, because we've got to show exactly that it's doing exactly what you are doing there. And because he practiced a lot up until that point, when he got that opportunity, he could then knock it out the park, basically, and then he was kind of trusted from then on, and he moved straight into a compositing position. And the thing I want you to get out of that as a skill and something you can do, and this is something that I do a lot with my students that I train privately, is I get them to do the things I'm teaching them at work in their lunch break so that everyone else can see, if that makes sense. And it's super, super, super important. So I think a lot of people think that when they join an industry, no matter what level they're at, they think that it's going to be this like slow linear thing. Every day you're getting a little bit better, and then you're going to slowly move into a mid-level and a senior, etc. But it's not like that at all. It's very much kind of like you'll be practicing. And to be honest with you, you'll probably be ready for those higher seniority positions before you actually get given it. But then someone's going to give you a chance. And then if you knock it out the park, then boom, the next day you're a mid-level or a senior. Or in Jack's case, he went from a runner to a compositor. And you need to kind of be very visible in regards to what you can do, basically, especially when you're starting out, if that makes sense, because no one's going to want to take a risk on you. So where you can, in your first kind of job and things, make it very obvious what you're doing and what you can do, and try and do it publicly in front of people. And that can be done as well via blogs and things like this, or the rookies, for instance. But if you do get a job in the industry as a runner or one of these entry positions, make it very clear and practice in the evening, basically. Super, super important. So another guy who's worth kind of taking a look at his career, and someone that I like to talk about, is a guy called Andrew Hodson, who is a 3D modeler. He's kind of was the go-to guy for spaceships, basically. He did a lot of Dune, 3D modeling in Dune. He's now at a games company. I think he might be at Epic now, basically, doing 3D modeling there, which is pretty cool. But me and Andrew started at NPC together in London, basically. And what Andrew was doing, again, I noticed exactly the same thing that he did. And I knew him earlier on than Jack, but he was doing the same things. So in the evenings, he'd go up to the modeling department and just sit on a spare desk and start doing this thing, if that makes sense, with his headphones on. Again, he wasn't drawing attention and asking people. Every now and then he might ask someone a question, but he was doing the same thing very publicly, basically kind of like doing his craft, if that makes sense. And then actually Guardians of the Galaxy was happening at the time, and they were short someone. And basically someone spotted what he was doing. He was modeling some spaceships, probably on purpose, because he knew that was the work we had. And then basically like next day he was asked, hey, like, we saw you doing some 3D modeling, like, you're actually pretty fucking good, man. Could you do that for Guardians of the Galaxy? And that's exactly what it was. Next day he started modeling on Guardians of the Galaxy, and he actually had some amazing spaceships that he modeled. And I was very jealous as well, because he ended up having those as Lego sets on his desk, basically. So again, those are a few things that I've just noticed, like at the start of your career. And again, this is something I get my students to do. I ask them in their lunch break, just sit there for 15, 20 minutes, playing around with something that isn't your work. And then people are naturally going to come over and be a bit inquisitive and be like, oh, what are you doing? And then you can start talking about it. So it's super, super important. Don't kind of think that everyone's going to know how good you are. You need to be very visible about it in regards to that. And you can't be a bit of a douche about it. Like, you need to be kind of very humble about it. But you can do this by doing it in front of people and making sure people are seeing. Super, super important. Another thing you can do is you can model other industries. And this, again, is something that you can get a lot out of this, believe it or not, because you can basically just nick the best ideas from the other industries. So I'm not a big kind of fashion person, but these two coats basically look the same to me, as you can see. But the one on the left, people are quite willing to spend £1,450 on, and the one on the right is about £100 from what I could see on like H&M or something like that. So why is that, right? So it's very interesting to think, like, okay, why is someone more like willing to spend that amount on the one on the left versus the one on the right? And there's a whole bunch of kind of psychological tricks to it, basically, that, again, you can take, right? Like, what's the difference between your day rate being this amount versus this amount? Well, it's going to be a bunch of the stuff that I talk about now, basically. So the first thing is celebrities maybe own the one on the left, right? So that's like, I think, a Burberry jacket. So there are probably celebrity shoots, and celebrities have kind of been taking pictures with that jacket on, basically, versus the one on the right. So how you can use that is you can work on high-profile projects, right? So, for instance, I worked on kind of like Jungle Book and Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that. That is a high-profile project, which means that I can get my salary up a little bit, basically. So that's something you can use. Another thing as well that these people do is they basically, like, now this is pretty screwed up, but they burn the stock that isn't sold, right? So there's a lot of like exclusivity and elitism to it. So what you can do as a little trick you can use is maybe if someone ever reaches out and says, hey, are you available to do some freelance work? You can say, I'm not actually available at the moment, but I will be available in 2 weeks' time. That may not be the case, but again, you've got a bit of exclusivity and a bit of kind of like, wow, it's hard to get this person, if that makes sense. Super important. The other thing as well is actually the price itself is a signifier. So a lot of people think that if you reduce the price, more people will buy it. But actually, sometimes if you raise the price on things, it actually makes it kind of, if the price is too low, people start questioning why it's so low, right? Like if I said there's a senior compositor and they are half the price of all the other senior compositors or VFX, you start questioning it, right? And being like, oh, why is that, if that makes sense? That doesn't necessarily seem like such a good deal. So again, just the higher price alone actually kind of comes with a bunch of stuff and makes it seem like you're a better artist and all this kind of thing. Now, obviously everything I'm saying relies on you actually being good at your craft, but what I'm trying to get at here is you could be the same person in your field, and let's say you've worked on a high profile project and not a high profile project, you may be able to get a bigger salary basically or day rate based on that. So super important. Another thing as well is just the brand story, right? So this again is something I feel like some creative industries do pretty well and others don't, especially in VFX. But again, like there's a whole story behind a certain brand that you could maybe start skewing in. So you could be the person who did this particular thing, and now you can start charging a higher salary. Maybe you specialize in a certain AI tool that no one else is, etc. Can be quite a good kind of qualifier basically in regards to that and make you stand out. So it's a lot of things to think about. So whenever you're kind of looking at these other fields, work out what are the expensive things in the other fields and they're not expensive, and work out what they're doing differently basically. And again, you can take all of that into your own field and apply it however you would like, which is super cool. So this again is looking at art kind of in the same way. So the one on the left is a print that I own from a London artist for £150, and the one on the right is a Banksy worth 442,000. So again, I personally prefer the one on the left mostly, and I'm slightly biased because that's on my wall. But again, if I didn't know the price of these, I still think I'd prefer the one on the left. And the crazy thing again is like, why is that? Well, Banksy's got this kind of like brand of he's very secretive and he kind of pops up in various places, so he gets lots of media attention, right? And then again, there's that kind of like story that his last painting sold for that much and all this kind of stuff. So again, have a think about what these two artists are doing and how they are this price is kind of coming about basically. Super important. So the next up is practicing. And that's pretty obvious, right? Like, obviously, you're going to need to practice your craft and all this kind of thing, because you can do all those tricks I just told you. But again, if you're not that great at your job and you can't deliver, then you're going to end up just having 1 month short contracts, basically, and your contracts will never be extended. So we need to make sure that we are doing those tricks that I talked about. So to help you land a role and get a decent salary, now you're going to deliver. And this seems a bit kind of over dramatic, I'd say, and it definitely is. But there's a quote, which is the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. Now, again, that's very dramatic when my life is just sat in front of a computer, right, making image a lightsaber glow a little bit more and things like this. But actually, there's a lot to take from that, because I find a lot of creators, what they do is there may be a new tool that maybe they need to, a company's using, or maybe they need to get better at a particular skill. And what they'll do is they'll wait until they get given a project that has that skill to then start practicing it. And that is always the worst time to practice any skills, right? Like the worst time to practice any skills is when you are stressed out and you've got to make a deadline and all of this kind of stuff. Like that's honestly the worst time, because you're just not going to learn anything. So what you want to be doing is just making sure, again, like when you're going for interviews, or again, if you are in these entry positions, know what kind of projects are coming up and start practicing those skills already. And again, practice them in front of people, as we said, in the studio or in the office, etc. But do it before you need them, if that makes sense. Like you don't want to be the person who's kind of having to learn on the job and stressed out and doing loads of hours, kind of having to compensate for the fact they didn't practice. So super important. The other way you can use this quote is, for instance, make like contacts and connections before you need them. A lot of people, I find, I do a fair bit of university talks and things like this, and the amount of times I will not have heard from a student, and then it gets to around like April, May, just before they're about to graduate, and suddenly you'll see like a spike in all the messages you get from everyone, basically. And that is the worst time to message people, because that's when everyone, all the students and people are messaging at that time. So you want to be getting ahead of the crowd by a couple of months, basically. So again, you want to make connections before you need them. If you're in a comfortable job at the moment, that is the time to make connections, because you are not going to be desperate. They're going to be real connections that you're actually making because you actually want to get to know the person, if that makes sense. That's way better than, crap, I need a job, I'm just going to spam everyone and cross my fingers, and then it gets a bit desperate, basically. It's not so good. So again, make all the connections before you actually need them. Super, super important. And that, by the way, worked for me very well in COVID time. I was in advertising at the time. I'd been in advertising for a year at NPC, and they made a large chunk of their team redundant because there wasn't many ads getting made in COVID. And because I had a lot of friends in other companies, I managed to very quickly land a role at another studio, basically because of that. And it wasn't me kind of like messaging people online, spamming them all. It was the fact that I'd already just made up a network of people and made those contacts, and it was then a lot easier than it could have been, basically, in that situation. So super, super important. If you're in a role and you're comfortable, don't get too comfortable. Like, start emailing out and start making connections at other companies, just to diversify, basically, a little bit. So another thing I want to talk about, and this is more what I kind of see at universities and people who are at kind of like entry-level positions in creative fields, and that is like doing the actual work. So I find a lot of people, what they'll do, I remember going to give a talk at university, and a student kind of said, oh, I really want to be I think he wanted to be an effects artist. And he was like, right, yeah, I really want to be an effects artist in visual effects. And I said, oh, could I have a look at your show reel and this kind of thing? And then I had a look at his show reel. It was okay. It wasn't amazing, but it was okay. And I said to him, oh, like, what are you doing to kind of improve and this stuff? And he basically was saying how he basically just been watching video tutorials over and over again. I was like, that's okay. Okay, let's test you then. So I would like you to do a water simulation on your computer. And he couldn't do it. And even though he'd watched the tutorial on it, or 5, 6 different tutorials, he couldn't do it. And this is the thing I find a lot of people, including myself sometimes, most of you, get into the habit of, we'll watch a tutorial and we'll think, oh, okay, now I know it, if that makes sense. And actually, you don't know it at all, because you haven't done any of the work, right? Like, in regards to actually kind of actually opening up the software and actually doing the thing, if that makes sense. So for me, if you feel like you're one of those people that watches a video tutorial and then you move on to the next one, that is the worst thing you can do. And actually, I'd argue that's kind of just a procrastination, basically. There's kind of, you're not really getting much out of it. So I would always make sure that if it's something you really, really want to learn, the best way to do it is a thing called spaced repetition. And this is something I use with a lot of my students. And I was saying to Nikita, actually, before this, 3 of them ended up getting internships at ILM this year. So the system kind of works, and there's a lot of science behind it. So spaced repetition is basically where you will, lots of people do it with cue cards, which can sometimes be a bit tricky in certain fields. But what you want to do is kind of gather knowledge you want to remember and understand. And then what you want to do is maybe kind of every hour or 2 hours on your phone or something, just have a question pop up. And for me, with my students, if they got time, I would actually have them open up the software and go through the thing. So if it was a particular technique in terms of green screen keys, I would get them to open up the software, bring in a green screen plate, spend 5 minutes doing that one small little technique, and then in 3 or 4 hours time, do the same thing again. Once they get it right twice in a row, then they don't have to do it again, basically, and they're good for a few days. And that's the quickest way to get that information in your head. And then the other thing is, you need to understand it. So there's 2 parts. You need to kind of get the information in your head and understand it. That's the get it in your head thing. The understanding bit is basically spend 30 minutes to an hour actually going through and trying that technique out that you've seen in the video tutorial on other plates, basically, or in other contexts, basically, to make sure you really understand it. Because you don't want to be somebody who can watch a video tutorial and do exactly what they're doing and not know why. You may be dragging the slider, but why are you dragging the slider, right? So try and practice what you've seen there in the tutorial in lots of different ways, basically, in lots of different environments, basically. So that's what I mean by doing the work. Again, too many people kind of watch video tutorial, including myself, by the way. Like, it's good to remind myself this as well. Like, you need to actually do the thing, if that makes sense. If you haven't actually had a go at doing it yourself, then count it as you don't really know it, basically. Super important. So the other thing is speed. And this is something I see a lot of kind of more senior artists, actually, who have spent kind of 10 to 15 years in a field, kind of get a bit frustrated at. Sometimes you'll see artists who are, again, 10 to 15 years in the field get frustrated at the new people because they're super keen and they think, oh, they think that they can kind of like do everything, and they've only been in the industry for 2 or 3 years and they think they're senior and all this kind of stuff. And actually, a lot of the case, again, that may not be the case, because the longer you've been in the industry, the more kind of different kind of situations you've seen. So, and obviously you're probably going to be better at your field because you've had longer, but that isn't always the case. And that's the thing, creative industries, it's generally down to, especially in visual effects, it's down to how tricky are the shots that you can do. That is what your salary is based on. It's not based on years, to be honest with you. It's based on how tricky are the shots that you can do. So with that in mind, you may be amazing at what you do and be able to do the tricky shots within 4 years. Okay, in that case, you're going to have that senior salary, basically, if you can do that. Now, odds are there's less odds, obviously, and less chance that you're going to be in that position in that amount of years, these 15, but it is possible. And I think a lot of people forget that. A lot of people think that you're going to slowly get to kind of 10 years and someone's going to say, yes, you're now a senior or a lead in your field. And that just isn't the case. Again, there are leads and seniors who have had 6 or 7 years in the industry, and some have had 20 years. And some people, again, like if you're not learning every year and this kind of thing, your progression will be a lot slower, basically. And think of it like 2 cars. One's going 5 miles an hour, one's going 60 miles an hour. Even if the one that's going 5 has been driving longer, it's not going to take long for the one that's moving a lot quicker to catch up, basically. And these fields, again, it's a lot about what you can do and your performance, basically, which can be a good and a bad thing depending on who you are. So next up is connection. This, again, as I was kind of saying earlier, a lot of people kind of make connections when they need them, which is completely the wrong way to do it. You want to do it, build them before, and start building up your network before, basically. And the other thing as well is there's connections in kind of in the company you're at, right? Which is, again, going to be super important in terms of your career progression. And I find in VFX anyway, we have things called dailies. So you may be back when we used to work in the office a lot, we'd all have these kind of like mini cinema rooms, and your shot would come up, and you'd go down to the mini cinema room, and there'd be the supervisor sat at the front of the cinema room, and they basically give you your notes in regards to that. And I always felt like a lot of people missed a trick on not kind of preparing for those meetings, basically, because that is the one chance you've got in front of that supervisor, right? Like it's a bit like if you kind of had that, like you go and see the client, right? Like you could be like really crap at your job and all this kind of stuff and not neat and all this thing, but all you're going to do is just dress up, right, and kind of like prepare for that one meeting, and that person will have a completely different view of you, basically. So there's a few things that you want to be doing. So when you're going to these calls, you should make sure that you've prepped and you know everything it is about that particular thing, right? So for instance, in terms of compositing, you may be going down and talking about a shot. You should know more about when the other departments are going to give you what they need than the supervisor. So you should be able to go, oh, they're going to give me this on this date here, here, and here. And then you should also know where your shot comes in terms of the edit. So you might say, oh yeah, this shot actually comes after this one, and I saw you liked this one where the sky was this bright. Would you like me to do that? So you need to come into that thing prepared. And this is something, again, I felt like a lot of people miss this trick in visual effects, where they'd kind of go down and they would just get their notes. And I speak to a lot of VFX youth nowadays, and like a lot of them love it if it's like this like collaborative process where you're bouncing ideas and then they're coming back with ideas and this kind of thing. And it's super important, again, no matter what field you're in, to come at this thing with ideas and show you're super keen, and just prep a little bit before these meetings with higher ups, because their time, you're not going to get much of it. So just make sure that you're prepping and you're kind of showing what you're thinking about and all this kind of stuff. Super important. So the next thing we're going to talk about is order. And the reason why we're talking about order is because I feel like a lot of people, they don't really like fail at things. They just kind of do things in the wrong order, basically. So what I mean by that is, when I was at university, I really wanted to write for this magazine called 3D World, I think it was. And they're like a big visual effects magazine. Because I used to read it every now and then, and I really liked their stuff. So when I got into the industry, my first job at MPC, I couldn't just email 3D World because I hadn't really done any writing before. Chances are they weren't going to really like pay me any attention. So what did I do? Well, what I did is I found another website called CG Tuts Plus, I think it was, that does like written tutorials. And they were more like a hobbyist website, basically, where people who kind of like did a bit of visual effects and a bit of Photoshop and stuff on the side for fun would kind of write tutorials. They still had a lot of views. So I reached out to them and said, hey, look, I'm a compositor working in the industry at the moment on, I think it was like Maleficent or Guardians of the Galaxy or James Bond or something. And again, using those qualifiers that we talked about earlier. And they said, oh, I'd love to write you guys an article on projections in Nuke, which is the software we use. And they said, oh my God, like this would be amazing. Like having someone from the industry on our website would be great and all this kind of stuff. So I spent a month on this tutorial for them. They paid me paid me a good rate. Actually, I think it was like £1,000 for the tutorial, which is pretty amazing as a junior compositor. And so anyway, I wrote them this tutorial. They put it on their website, and because I was kind of one of the only actual industry professionals, end up being like the most seen compositing tutorial on their whole site and all this kind of thing. And what that meant is I could then go to 3D World and say, I've written the most read like article on this website and all this kind of stuff, right? And then what it meant is 3D World took me way more seriously because I could actually show them the writing and this kind of thing. Whereas if I'd done it the other way around and just messaged 3D World in the first place and said, could I write for you? They probably would have said no. So I think a lot of the time, if you feel like you're reaching out to people and or applying things and they're saying no, obviously it's still worth doing it every now and then, but try and work out, can I change the order here? Could I go here and then do that thing, if that makes sense? Like, what could I do to increase my odds of success, basically? Super important to think about in regards to creative fields in general, especially when it comes to portfolio stuff. So the other thing, again, as I was mentioning earlier, is like the speed thing. Like, are you a junior, a mid, or senior? No one's ever going to tell you that in the industry, by the way. In fact, actually, it's kind of companies, it's in their interest to keep you kind of on the lower ones, right? Because then they don't get to pay much. I mean, in a dream world, you'd be a senior on a junior salary, right? Because then they get to earn a little bit more money on you. So no one's ever going to tell you what position you're in. The best way to kind of work it out is how tricky are the shots I'm tackling compared to what other people are tackling, if that makes sense. You may have a rough idea of if someone else is a mid or a senior or a junior they've hired in. So see how you're doing compared to them, basically. And in terms of salaries, this was a little while ago. That shouldn't be 14, by the way. That is ridiculous low and probably illegal as a day rate, so just ignore that. But that would be about 150 to 220. So it's kind of the same in my experience in terms of euros and pounds at the moment. US is way higher, by the way. Like, there's some rates in the US and New York, like $1,000 a day for a compositor, a senior comper. But these are roughly the rates in terms of for TV and film in VFX currently in Europe and the UK. And again, you can see there's quite a wide range there, right? Like, you might be looking at it going, wow, like 320 to 500, like what's the difference in that? Well, that could be a case of you are like you've worked there before. Maybe you're a safe pair of hands, right? So that you can charge a bit more because they really want you back. That may be the fact that, again, you can tackle the trickiest shots without ever having to ask her any questions. That could be that you're really nice to work with and all this kind of stuff, right? So a lot goes into that. That's a big discrepancy. Again, even the mid 220 to 320, right? That's a big discrepancy. And again, it's all down to skills, how you are like to work with and all this kind of stuff, as you can see. So super important. And by the way, I'm happy to talk salary. So like, if you guys, obviously I come from the VFX field, so I can only give you like input on that. But if you want more information in terms of salaries, contracts, yearly salaries and things like that, then please let me know and I'll happily give you the numbers on that as well. Super important. I just feel like people don't ask this and it's like, but this is what you want as a job, right? You're gonna have to pay your bills. So it's probably useful for you to know this stuff. So yeah, super important. So the next one is extend. And what I mean by extend is generally you're going to be on contracts in this industry, to be honest with you. Sometimes you get lucky and you're in full-time roles, but most of the time you're going to be on contracts. And to be completely frank as well, even if you're full-time, there's no safety net. They can still get rid of you in 4 weeks. So it's actually kind of like, it doesn't really matter which one you are, to be honest with you. Full-time is nice psychologically, but it doesn't really make any difference in the grand scheme of things. Can help with loans and mortgages and stuff, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a huge deal. So what I mean by extend is, again, because you're going to be on contract, you're going to have your contract extended ideally. So again, speaking about before where people kind of, you want to jump the gun and be a few months ahead of people, same thing in terms of contract extension. So let's say you have a 6-month contract. Ideally, the general ethos is like a month to a month and a half before your contract's going to end. You would reach out to HR, maybe your department manager or something like that, and just say, hey, like, I really enjoy working here. My contract's coming to an end in a month and a half. Do you think we've got some more projects coming in that you'd like me to work on? And then the reason why, again, you do it early is because now, again, you're getting ahead of everyone else. They'll say, ideally say, yes, we would love to keep you. Actually, we've got another project that's starting up. Then we'll keep you for another 6 months. Amazing. But if the answer is, look, we're going to actually have no work after your contract ends, now you've just gained yourself a month and a half to start emailing out to your network that you've been building, again, as we said, with the connections and all this kind of stuff, or 2 months before, to start then reaching out and start kind of working out where you're going to be going next. And again, if everyone else is saying do that a month before, you don't want to be competing against everyone else, like I was saying. So do it a little earlier than everyone else, basically. Super important in regards to that stuff. So the next thing is be an Apple product. So what do I mean by this? Well, Apple, you go into an Apple shop, and let's say you buy an iPhone or something. Why don't they just like throw the iPhone at you and then you leave the store, right? Like that would literally, like, you'd be in the same situation, right? You've got the phone, great. Why don't they do that? Why have they spent all this money on the shop and the box and all of this kind of stuff? Well, again, it goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of the fancy coats and things like this. But the reason why I'm bringing up here is they've designed the whole experience, right, of you buying a product through them, basically. Like, it's a way funner experience doing that, be buying it on like Amazon or something online and just getting it shipped through your door. So what I would like you to think about is, what is the experience of working with you like as a whatever you do in your field, basically? Like, what is that experience like? Like, if someone has a last minute request, how are you when it comes to acting? In terms of, are you annoyed at them? Are you okay? Are you kind of trying to bounce ideas and kind of figure it out together? Like, what is the process of working you like? And I would really advise writing that down, and write down, like, what is the process of me? Like, I would be like this. If in this situation, I'd be like this. My email is already always like this. Like, it's super important. And the reason why is because it's very easy to be doing the best stuff when everything's going well, you're in a good mood, everything's fine. But when things start getting a bit tricky, that's when you really see the stuff kind of shift, if that makes sense, and when people are stressed as well. So it's nice to have those bullet pointed down, so that, okay, if you're having a bad day, okay, this is my brand, this is how I want people to kind of be when they're working with me. And you don't have to make it like disingenuous, like make sure it's you, but make sure it's you on a good day, if that makes sense, all the time. Super important. Again, thinking about how you're going to do that is important, because not many people, again, think of doing that. They kind of do their portfolio and things, so they don't think of, again, what is it like in an interview? What do you like? Like, what are you wearing? Are you asking them questions? Are you letting them ask you questions? Like, all of this stuff is super important to think about. So another thing in your career is there's going to be a lot of risk. In any career, there's going to be risk, but in creative stuff, there may be a little more risk than other places, basically. So basically, what you want to be doing is you want to be making sure you make the most of asymmetrical risk. What is that? Well, that's basically where your chance of winning, or the upside is way bigger than the downside. So you could lose a tiny amount, barely anything, and your upside's pretty big. So again, like, this is super important to think about. For instance, like, I'll give you an example of this: emails or messaging people on LinkedIn. What's the worst thing that's going to happen to you if no one replies to your message on LinkedIn or an email? Nothing, right? So there's like literally no risk, unless you write the worst email in the world and you're slagging off the person, right? Then it's gonna, then okay, yeah, then there's a lot of risk to it. But if you're writing an email to someone, maybe introducing yourself, sending your portfolio, maybe asking a couple of questions about the company, very little risk on that. Again, they may not reply, and the odds are they probably won't reply because they may get a lot of those a day, but there's no downside for you. But there's a massive upside, right? Like, where could that lead? Well, that could lead to them inviting you in, and all of this kind of interesting stuff. And there's actually, speaking about this in real life, like, there's someone who I've emailed and said thank you to every year, because he helped me out when I was at university and gave me some feedback on my work for the last like 8 or 9 years. And every year now, we just get into the habit of kind of emailing out, basically, and saying kind of how are you doing, and updating each other on where we are in the world. But I think like it was like 3 or 4 years into doing that, he was like, dude, if you ever need like a job in this company, like, I'll happily help you out and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't start it out by doing that. That's not why I sent the thank you message. It was literally like, he helped me get a job after university. But man, look where it led to and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of crazy in regards to that. Another thing as well, by the way, in terms of asymmetrical risk, this is a bizarre tangent, but I actually got a PhD, believe it or not, in this kind of weird way as well. So like, I gave a talk for the company that makes the software I use, called The Foundry. And in the audience, there was someone who was a lecturer at university. And they then said, oh, like, I really liked what you're kind of talking about. Would you be possible to come into the university? I was like, yeah, there's like no downside. Let's go for it. I'll come in. So good. And then they led to me going in every year and kind of teaching, helping out the course. And then I was put forward for an honorary doctorate, and I got a PhD and had to dress up like Harry Potter for a day, basically, in a rugby. Again, like, there was no downside to me saying yes to that, basically. And early on in your career, you've got more time to say yes to all this stuff. So like you need to be doing it, like you need to be making these opportunities. And again, email out to people and all this kind of stuff to make sure that you're making the most of that. Again, there's no downside, basically. Super important. Another one is like rigging the game in your favor. So another way you can do this is some people, when they get into the industry, they get stuck at companies. And one of the quickest ways to get your rates up is once you feel like you're in kind of like a junior or a mid or a senior level, when you want to, it's quite hard to get your salary up if you stay at one place. You want to kind of like move company when you feel like you're in the next kind of like seniority level, I guess you could say. But again, a lot of people feel like they're stuck. And also, shorter contracts generally pay the best because companies like desperate, oh crap, we just need someone in for 2 months just to get some stuff done. They generally pay pretty well. So again, but if you've got no savings and you've got bills to pay, then you can't take those shorter contracts. So something I would start doing, if you're in the fortunate position to be able to do it, is starting putting some money every month away. And if you can, keep doing that until you're about like 6 months living expenses. In my experience, is kind of like ideal. And then you can start taking a bit of risk, basically, and all this kind of stuff. What I mean by risk is like, oh, I would like to do a couple of weeks at that company I've always liked to work for in ads or in this, right? And you can take these risks basically and like these weird tangents if you have this kind of like nice backup basically. So again, I remember what it was like at the start of my career, and it was kind of like 20, 30 pounds a month or whatever it might be. But try and start doing that early. The earlier you can do it, the better. And for those of you who've been to university and living on like instant noodles and things like that, try and keep that lifestyle going for a fair bit, because you can then like make your nice like backup money basically to the side, and the quicker you can do that, the better again, because it just means that you're a bit more, you can withstand volatility basically, and also you can take again like these cool little projects and stuff like that, which again super useful. So make sure you do that earlier on in your career so that you're not stuck in a company basically you don't want to be stuck at. So another thing is just like knowing your odds, and what I mean by knowing your odds is the fact that basically, again, like comes back to email, right? Like, odds are you're not going to get a reply. So act accordingly. Like, okay, you're not going to send one of those a day. I would argue if you really want to kind of get into your industry, make it so that LinkedIn are telling you you're not allowed to send any messages to anyone for the rest of the month because you've sent too many. That's when you know you've sent enough messages to people, basically. And you don't want to make them super spammy, but just introduce yourself. Say, hey, I was wondering if it'd be possible. I know you're extremely busy, but I was wondering if it could possibly give some feedback on my portfolio. Again, know your odds. Odds are you're not going to hear back, so we're going to send 200 of those things, and you're probably going to hear back from 1 or 2, basically. So don't get disheartened if your odds are low. Don't get disheartened if it doesn't happen. The other thing is people need to make sure that, like, you need to make sure people know you actually exist in the world. You can be as good as you want, but if no one knows it, then it's going to be very tricky to get a job. And Rookies is great for that, obviously, because the judges were having to look at all your portfolios and stuff, which is great. With the Rookies, though, again, there's so many people applying, it can sometimes be hard to kind of like exactly stand out. So make sure you've got a website and all of this kind of stuff, and you post on LinkedIn about your stuff and all this kind of thing. So there's always 2 parts to it. You've got to get really good and make sure people know you are really good, basically. Super important. So luck, again, is going to be a super important one, basically. So again, just make sure that you build your luck, basically. So the bigger your network, the more lucky you're going to get and be, basically, in my opinion. So contrast is a super useful one. And what I mean by contrast is how our brains work. This is how our brains work, basically. We're always basing something on contrast. What I mean by that is this: if you put your hand in one super cold bucket of water, one super hot bucket of water, and then stick them both in a lukewarm bucket, this one's going to feel warmer, the one that came from the super cold, and this one's going to feel colder. So what I mean by this is, the amount of times I've seen asked in the industry, they get asked, how long will this take? Right? Like, oh, how long do you think that will take? A lot of people, they feel like they have to, especially early on in your career, you say less than you think to impress them. But that's like the worst thing you can do, because now if you deliver and get it done that quick, they're not going to appreciate it, because they'll just think, oh, well, okay, you just did it on time. And if you go later, then you look like, oh, crap, I didn't hit my deadline. So what I would suggest doing is take how long you think it's going to take, and some people say double it, some people say multiply it by 1.5, whatever you think needs to happen. But then let's say you double it. So you say, rather than 2 days, it's going to take 4. Now, if you get it done in 2 days, you look like a genius. If you get it done in 4, well, now, okay, you've hit your target, and then there's basically no chance you're going to ever go over, right? So it's super important. Like, you are the ones who are setting the context and the boundaries. So obviously you can't take the piss and say it's going to take 50 days and actually it takes you 1 day, right? That's going to be a bit too extreme. But it's super important, again, like when you're taking on work, and or if anyone at work asks you how long something's going to take, add a little bit of time to it just to kind of cover yourself, because things can go wrong, and then you'll always be on time or a little early, which is a good reputation to have in my experience. So I've got just a couple more of these, and then we'll do a bunch of Q&As. I can see a few of you kind of written some stuff in the chat, so we'll come to those if there's any questions there. The other one is kind of strategy to getting your rates up. So there's 2 strategies you can do. Generally, the people who are heads of have been at the company for kind of like 15, 20 years in my experience, a long, long, long time, because they know the ins and outs, they know everyone, all this kind of thing. So that's one strategy. The other strategy, which will get your salary up quicker, but you'll hit a ceiling, is you hop every seniority level. So you go from when you feel like you're a mid-level, you jump company and get your mid-level salary. And by the way, I know people have doubled their salaries overnight doing that. So they'll go from 20,000 a year to 40,000 a year doing that. And then they go from a mid to a senior, and then again, they up their salary. And that's a good way to get your salary up if you're good at what you do, but you'll hit a ceiling where it won't go up anymore until you kind of end up, if you want to go into those managerial roles. So you do have to stay at a company for a long time at some point if you want to move up any further. But there's kind of 2 strategies I see the best people use in Germany. It's those 2. So super, super important to kind of bear in mind in your career. So what do we pick? Knowledge or money, right? So like, obviously people are going to be at different points in their careers and in their life and things like this. But generally, if you can, and again, it's a fortunate position to be in, early on in your career, you want to pick knowledge over money. So you want to be at the company where you're going to learn the most on the highest kind of profile shows, ideally. And that's going to set you up a lot, basically, in regards to this stuff. So you want to pick knowledge over money at the start of your career. And then once you've got that knowledge, then you can decide what you want to do. Again, you may go to another studio because you want to learn more stuff about something they're doing. But you can actually trade that knowledge then for money and kind of reverse it, basically, if you would like to. So at the start of your career, though, it can really slow you down and you lose momentum if you go for the highest paid junior salary or something like that. Like, again, you want to go at a studio where you're going to learn the most, because that's going to, again, get your career progression up, and then the rates will come, all this done thing. So the final thing I want to talk about, I'm going to skip over iterate because it's kind of, I went touched on it before, is think like a company. So I think a lot of people, we are, especially creatives, we are very kind of like attached to our work, right? Like, it's more than just work, if that makes sense. So what I mean by this is, like, don't take it personally if companies are trying to knock your salary down. That's kind of their job. The company's job, believe it or not, is to make a profit, basically. And how they do that is they want your rate to be low so that it's less than their income, and then they earn more profit. So you need to act the same way, by the way. Like, your job is for your company, which is you, is to also act like that. So your job is to get your rate as high as possible, and then their rate is to get your, well, their job is to make you happy and get your rate as low as kind of like you're happy doing, basically. So don't take anything personally. It's all just think like a company. It's just 2 companies negotiating in that respect. So it's super, super important to make sure about that. And the other thing as well, in terms of thinking like a company, is if you are asking for a rate, like a salary, let's say 300, 400 pound a day, you need to be making more income for the company than that, right? Because otherwise they're not going to be willing to pay you that amount. So that, again, like, you need to be performing very highly to therefore get a better rate, basically. So it's, again, a super, super important thing to think about. Like, you need to be making more income than they're paying you, otherwise your rate will never go up. So again, think like a company in that respect as well. So there you go. So that has been all the strategies. And I know that was a lot, but that is all the strategies that I've seen in my career, and I've kind of been passing on, basically. And I've tried to make it fairly agnostic to the effect. So I actually wrote all the notes for this on my website. So you can kind of check them all out there if you'd like. So if you want to kind of go back and read any of these notes and this kind of thing, like, please feel free to kind of check those out and drop me an email as well. So yeah, and then I'll let Nikita kind of take it away with finding any find the questions and things. So hopefully that was useful.